is Conspirinormal.
Hi, y'all. Welcome back to Conspirinormal. We hope you guys enjoyed the Paranoid Styles episode that we did, and we are here with three of our favorite people that we recently got to hang out with in Somerset, fucking Kentucky.
Gave us some great hospitality.
Yeah, it was really fun. We've got the Pennyroyal crew right here. We of course got Nathan Isaac.
Hey guys.
And Darian. It's Darian West, right?
Darian West.
Darian West. And Kyle Kadel.
That's me.
Graciously showed us around his paranormal museum.
I was wearing your shirt yesterday. I don't have it on right now, but
Dude, awesome. I hope you guys enjoyed it, man.
absolutely. I'd encourage anyone to go out there and check that museum out. It's really cool.
Nice.
Yeah, it's a great place, and we really enjoyed our time there. We got to go to the museum, and then we spent the rest of the night over at Jarfly for you guys' release party for the second season, and we won the trivia game.
You did.
I feel bad. Those guys next to us who I looked at them and I was like, oh man, we're sorry. They're like, we know we didn't have a chance against you. I was like,
those people I met at CryptidCon, the people you're talking about, and I was blown away that they even came, and they did really good still. That blew me away, you know?
Yeah, that was an interesting eclectic mix that you guys had in there that night, and we got the whole tour of that whole furniture building and what you guys are doing in there, and we got to talk to Dan Dutton, and the next day before we headed back to Nashville, we got to spend some time with Dan over at Dandyland, and that was a real treat. So thank you guys for kind of making that introduction as well. He's an interesting person, and we will definitely have him on the show at some point. He showed us some of his artwork. He actually gave me a book about the murder ballads. That some of his artwork that I was real interested in, and saw some other interesting things. Got to hang out with the goats, so that was really cool. So
He did he talk about the child ballads at all with you guys? That he's like one of the last people that, I mean, he knows 120 or however many it is, over 100 of the child ballads. He has it memorized. So a lot of those giant paintings. Did he take you down to the painting studio? There's the sculpture studio, and then there's the Japanese style painting studio.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
All right. So that building, he probably had told you this, and I'll bore you with it again, but that building was built from the wood of the first funeral home in Somerset when they tore it down. But there's also, Darian, we found this weird connection out that some of the stuff I'm always afraid to talk about.
Yeah, I was going to say we shouldn't talk about that.
So anyway, there are some strange murders and federal controversy tied to that building. Some things happened inside that funeral home that reached federal criminal levels, I think. And anyway, it's weird because Dan ended up with the wood and the table, the embalming table.
Yep.
And,
yeah, he showed us the embalming table. Yeah.
I mean, it's another one of those strange things where we were researching some of the stories here in town, and it led to that place. And then while I'm talking to Dan about it, he's like, "Oh, that's my studio. That's where that wood comes from," And it's the weird narrative connections between all of this stuff is super, super strange. He showed you the. I'm sure the Aunt Lou stuff, the witch. He did a whole series on this witch, and she was a relative of his family and of him, but she was a Tartar. The Duttons and the Tartars and two other families came from Virginia, and they were Pennsylvania Dutch, and some of them performed hexen, kind of
powwow. Yeah.
Powwow, yeah.
We talked a lot about powwow, yeah. Telling him about Jack Montgomery's work too.
Oh, I'm not familiar with.
Well, Jack Montgomery, someone has been on the show. He was part of the 2020 conference, and he wrote a book called American Shamans. He lives actually in Bowling Green, or I think, well, he might have moved back to South Carolina, but he was in Bowling Green at the University of Western Kentucky, and he's actually a powwow practitioner as well.
Oh shit, that's fascinating. Oh well, so this witch though, she's a Tartar, and he was over here for breakfast this past weekend and was telling me this crazy story about Aunt Lou and this relative of hers, this Judge Tartar. And then I was like, the house that we just bought that I'm in right now was built by Judge Tartar, you know?
Oh, really?
And yeah, it was just one of those weird things where I had Dan gasp, you know, because there was this weird connection to all of this stuff, you know, just the way that things loop back. They loop back on themselves, it seems.
Yeah, well, it seems like Somerset is an interesting small town. I mean, it's very... When we drove, we actually went up I-65, and then we cut across the Cumberland Parkway, which we'll talk a little bit about the I-66 thing here in a little bit. But, you know, it seems like it's kind of like it's its own little place. It's kind of isolated in many ways.
I like to think of it kind of like the film Dirty Dancing, right? That resort town that they're in.
Right.
That's really what Somerset sort of became in the 1970s. It was this idyllic resort town for these rich people from Cincinnati to come down to. And so there are all kinds of those little like Dirty Dancing style resorts all around the lake. And lots of really weird, dastardly things happen there. So, you know.
And literal dance halls on the lake.
Yeah.
People.
Yeah, when we were, you took us around on a little tour, and we got to see the little like Town Springs weird monument pyramid thing, and that was interesting, which is, I guess, going to be just demolished at some point. But then Nathan, as we're walking, he's like, the first thing he says on the tour is like, "That's where the dead bodies were found in the dumpster," and I'm just like, wow, okay.
Right. You know, I mean, it's like right there's the sheriff's department. That dumpster, there was a body there for 2 weeks before someone found it, you know? And it's like, oh, it is weird. Like when you're standing there on the street, we're like, body in the dumpster, they assassinated an attorney over here, you know, these two kids, you know, it was just like all around you. You can just look in a 360, you know, view, and there's murders all around you.
And I saw the map in the Paranormal Museum that looks like you like plotted out a lot of these different things from the events that you've been studying, and it looks like maybe there's some ley lines going on or some weird mystical toponymy.
That map, one of the pieces from like upstairs in the second floor Jarfly, we had the entire county and plus some mapped out with those like geographic maps from, I think it was like 75, 77. It was literally in the time period where we're looking at this weird stuff. And like, it's a geological survey, and they have map coordinates of like, not only Pulaski County, but like this entire southeastern quadrant. And so we had all the maps up during the investigation and like trying to plot things. And so I took that main one as a display piece to the museum that has like downtown Somerset on it. I didn't take the one that has the Mount Victory mines on it. It's still up in the Jarfly studio.
Cool.
You know, when I was talking to Walter Bosley about this stuff too, it was one of those things where it's like, when you start putting these murders, you know, and Adam, you've been out there, right? To
San Bernardino, yeah.
San Bernardino, you know, and it's like there definitely is a weirdness to. I think we were even talking about it at the, you know, at the party that there is this, you know, these things don't even have to occur. You know, they don't have to be orchestrated by an actual group trying to kill people over a 40-year or 60-year period, right? That these things are sort of happening inside of a natural ritual space, which is, the Pennyroyal, which is Pulaski County. And so, there are these strange murders. What year is it, Darian? The one where the woman's found lying in the middle of the road dead, and they put her clothing, or she put her clothing off to the side of the road.
I found that again the other day. It's like in the early 1900s.
Yeah, early 1900s, right? And she's like laying in the middle of the road, and they folded all of her pieces of clothing very neatly on the side of the road, and she's in the center of the road, dead, right? And there's no cause of death. No one knows. They just found this.
It was almost at the same time. There was a story of a guy who I think he had like clocked out of his shift in Chicago, and then the next day he was found hanging from like barbed wire from a tree. It's like also in the early
in Pulaski, in Pulaski,
in Somerset. It's like, why? How did that happen?
Yeah. But when you look at these murders across the decades, there does seem to be a weird recurrence to them in terms of where they're located and the connections between the people and the place. It's super strange, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I've always wondered if you picked a place and started digging, would you find this many murders and all of this strangeness? But I talked to Tim Renner about this. And when he and I discussed some of this, and he said that he thought the same thing, but when he did choose a random place, he did not find that to be the case.
Yeah, heard him say that before.
Yeah, because you think, well, anywhere you're going to find murders, but it's like, no, actually not.
There's
not
definite
like
hot spots, yeah. And like you're saying, a lot of these have strange circumstances around them, and some of them, you can go out on a limb and think that they do resemble what are called occult murders.
I think some of them definitely are occult murders. I mean, not all of them have to be connected to some type of working, and obviously that's what. Yeah,
they don't all have to be connected to each other necessarily too, but.
Yeah. And I think that's part of Downard's whole mystical toponymy, and if you want to carry that forward to Lauren Coleman, and some of his stuff too, that because he has subsequent commentary on all of the Fayette factor stuff, about that Grimstead. I think he wrote this as Jim Brandon, right? The Fayette factor. Didn't he use Jim Brandon?
No, actually it is under Grimstead's name. Mm-hmm.
Is it under Grimstead? So, but that Fayette factor, he was living in, we talked about this in the show. He was living in Louisville and was traveling through Kentucky, was driving from Lexington up to Cincinnati in Weird America. There are a lot of sections of the chapters where he's talking about being on I-75 between Lexington and Cincinnati. And then obviously that's where the whole Fayette factor thing comes from, because he was, Lexington, where he was at doing a lot of reporting, is Fayette County. And everything in Fayette County is named after General Lafayette. So when you read that essay, knowing that he's in Kentucky, that he's in Lexington, in Fayette County, and then that sort of is built around that. And then Lauren Coleman later, talks about it even more. The idea that places that have the name Fayette or Lafayette are places of occult significance. And I didn't really realize until I looked at Coleman's stuff that a lot of that General Lafayette was being taken to different lodges, and they were performing, Masonic rituals, mm-hmm. and that's where some of this weirdness comes from, right? That there's a correspondence between those things, but I do think that whole idea of the Fayette factor and mystical toponymy that built into the name of the place and the location of the place, there are these sort of I don't know these connections across time. That somebody could name a town out west and not know that 100 years from from that point, something was going to happen there. And that really is retroactively sort of is why the town is named that, and I think a lot of that is present here in Somerset. A lot of smaller places in, Omega. There's a place in Pulaski County called Omega, and it's a site of a lot of violence. They found a lot of dead bodies there, and so Omega Park, and there's just a whole list of places that have these weird names, and it's like because of those names, the things connected to the naming of it seem to make sense,
Yeah, that reminds me of some of the Timothy Renner stuff too. Like with Pandemonium is a place that we've done a lot of explorations of, and
yeah. I love all of his crazy their Site 7 stuff, but yeah, the Pandemonium thing is very interesting.
Reminds me a little bit about there is a Lafayette. Or Lafayette, the natives say Lafayette, Georgia. Close to there is where the Corsewood Manor is, and the kind of a weird area in that area. But it's a little closer to Somerville, but it's kind of in between area between them. I thought about that whenever, I listened to that episode of the podcast last night. So
it's one of those things, like certain numbers that like. Once you become more aware of it, like you'll just, and I mean, it's obviously, he's a big Revolutionary War ally and hero. So a lot of shit was named after him. But once you like turn that on, you just like see it everywhere. Every time I travel, I'm like, oh, Lafayette building, Lafayette Street, Lafayette.
Yeah. And then, Pulaski's like that too. There are just a ton of places across America called Pulaski. Now, I don't know if strange things happen in all those places, but the Casimir Pulaski, that is this Revolutionary War hero that came from, I think, Poland. That's what we're named after. But there was a controversy. I think this was last year. They dug up his body, and it turned out that he was a transgender and was more female than male. And it was the Smithsonian that actually did the research. And people,
do you mean he was a hermaphrodite?
Yeah. Now I don't mean transgender. Yeah, hermaphrodite. Yeah, but that he was more female than male. And but they people went crazy. They wouldn't accept it because he's such a in a lot of people's minds a masculine war hero. And that just, I mean, people were threatening to sue the Smithsonian. They were trying to suppress the story. And I thought, this is crazy, man. It's a fact. This is reality, and people were like, no way. You can't say this. It's like, why? Why is that a problem? Yeah, I just thought that was an interesting, in just in terms of, I don't know, the connection to Pulaski County and everything. It just, I don't know. It was a fascinating story, though.
I would also always make the connection in New Orleans. A big hero is Jean Lafitte. And I always think of Lafitte as basically a non-Americanized version of Lafayette, Yeah,
that's an interesting point. It's very similar phonetically in a way.
Yeah, I definitely see someone at Ellis Island or something changing Lafayette to Lafitte to Lafayette,
So season 2 is out. What are you guys focusing on in season 2? And I guess this season is a little less focused on Somerset than season 1.
The motif that sort of is the thread that every episode hugs is this idea of the occult history or the secret history of the U.S. transportation system. And I mentioned it in the first episode, but Nick Pizzolatto that did True Detective in the second, before he released the second season, a lot of people asked him, what's it about? And he mentions that it's about the occult history of the U.S. transportation system. And I thought, man, that's going to be awesome. And then when it came out, obviously it wasn't. I mean, it had occult aspects of those roads out west, in Southern California, wherever they were. But it really didn't give me enough information. And so when you start digging into the occult history of the U.S. transportation system, there's a lot of stuff. And that's what I kind of imagined, was that he probably has a very large file or a lot of files on his research for that subject, but it's so esoteric that probably the producers of the show were like, no way, man, you can't go into this shit. So anyway, that kind of piqued my interest into researching that stuff, and it's just fascinating. And so whenever I was looking at all of the things that had sort of happened to us after we released season 1, there was a lot of the story that we hadn't told yet, a lot of things that were happening still, and things that happened as a result of the release of the show. So I just thought it was a great sort of motif and concept, because of this weird feeling that we were on some path. That's what people get, people are always like, oh, you guys are like on a path to something, or something's unfolding, or, there's some type of initiatory element to this. And so the idea of roads and paths and it just sort of naturally, sort of became this motif about the occult history of the highway system. It connects with this story of Route 66 and I-66 that ties Pulaski County into that story. And I think that's what all of the episodes, they're not really focused so much on Pulaski County, but there's always there's a starting point here, and that takes the story wider, and sort of looks at this bigger vision, these more far-reaching connections. Because that's the thing that we found, was that once the show was out, we were connecting with people from all over the country. People were writing to us. We were reaching out to people, doing research, and so the story just became a lot bigger. And I wanted to capture that in the second season. And I felt like roads and highways and paths were a great way to a great metaphor, to let us package a lot of these ideas. Yeah, I mean, think about whenever I do things, right? Whenever I was editing the show, right? Like the second episode, the episode that you're in, and it's exactly 93 minutes, right? Now, is anybody going to notice that? And there are like other episodes that the amount of time of the episodes are what are numbers that hold mystical significance for me, because I think that they're auspicious or have some element of positive energy with those numbers. And so I've actually edited the show to encode those numbers. Now, that's just for me personally, that I've done this, right? But why? I mean, people that are naming roads, people that are doing these things and are architects of this stuff, they're embedding their own personal gematrias and, numerological, significances into the things they're doing and they're working on, So, I mean, I think mystical toponymy is absolutely a real thing. And it doesn't even have to be cosmic or occulted, like it's just in the way that human beings are human beings. We're naturally encoding ourselves in the things that we're working on, and connections pop out. It's just natural that you're going to find connections through the things you're doing with other people. And we just naturally encode ourselves into works and events and actions that we take and other people do. And when those things come together, it's a weird kind of magic, and James Shelby Downard calls it mystical toponymy, call it, whatever, propinquity, but it doesn't have to be some type of like weird otherworldly magic. I think it's just a sort of a facet, a feature of reality, and just of living, lives as human beings, and we're strange little creatures. Obviously, we have talked a lot, off, outside of the shows and stuff, and have done a lot of research together on the Downard stuff. And I meant to tell you this before we got on here too, but I don't think I've told you about the Belligerent Rabbit Society letter that I got from a private collection at Eastern Michigan University. Did I tell you about this?
I think I was privy to a conversation you were having about it. I don't recall all the details. It was a little hazy.
I got it though. I got it. They sent me the letter. I begged them, and they were like super kind. And it's a letter from 1973, man. And it is from the Belligerent Rabbit Society to this sociologist named Marcello Truzzi, who studied the occult, who was a circus performer earlier in life. And so he was a contemporary of Geller, Grundella, the Green Witch of Detroit. He was like very connected to her. The collection has like all these letters and stuff, but they had one file in the collection that was called the Belligerent Rabbit Society. And so I reached out to him. I begged them, I can't make it to you because of COVID. Could you please just pull this file out and copy it? And they did. It's a 10-page letter, and it's from Downard. And he explains that he is the Belligerent Rabbit Society. And it's like so far of everything that we found, it is the earliest correspondence from Downard, and it has all kinds of weird shit and new stuff in it. And he even mentions the fucking Sovereign Order of St. John, the SOSJ stuff that, Stephen Snyder's always talking about. And it's weird, man. I mean, it had all kinds of stuff that I've never heard Downard talk about. And anyway, I've got to send it to you. That's my point.
Please.
Is that I haven't sent it to you. We haven't had time to talk about it, but obviously, I've talked a lot outside of all this stuff about the Downard, mythos and all this research. But
for people that have not listened to Pennyroyal, those few people that are out there, and then people that are maybe new to this show, because we've talked about James Shelby Downard in the past, but it's been several episodes. Let's talk a little bit about who James Shelby Downard was and how you guys became interested in really exploring this.
Well, he is partially a Kentucky boy.
Well, so, James Shelby Downard is the arch conspiracy theorist. He's sort of the archetype, I think, of what a conspiracy theorist is in popular media. The weird thing about Downard is that there's this myth that maybe it's not a myth. I don't know. I mean, that's part of the mystery here, is that he was this sort of atomic cowboy, occultist driving across the country, pulling a silver Airstream with a 45 strapped to his hip in a suit.
My retirement dream.
Right. Yeah. And you're hitting all of these like mystical sites across, you're speeding across the 33rd degree, parallel, this latitude. No.
Yeah, it's latitude. Yeah.
Or latitude. Yeah. And, but he's going from St. Pete all the way to San Diego. And, all along the way, he goes through Dallas. He goes through all of, Truth and Consequences, New Mexico, visits the Trinity site, all this crazy stuff. And that's where his mystical toponymy pops out. The theory that all these names are connected to things. And then obviously his most famous work, purportedly his work, is called King Kill 33, which he co-authored with the controversial figure Michael A. Hoffman II, published for the first time on Adam Parfrey's, or via Adam Parfrey's Feral House Publishing, in Parfrey's book Apocalypse Culture. And so that laid out this grand theory that JFK was murdered in a Masonic killing of the king ritual, and all of the crazy symbolism that's connected to it. Now, there's a question. The reason that we are sort of tied into the Downard thing is that the first mention of Downard is in Cosmic Trigger, Robert Anton Wilson's book, Grimstead, William Grimstead that we were just talking about, that wrote the Fayette Factor stuff. He meets Downard in St. Petersburg and records a series of tapes called the Sirius Rising tapes. And those are the recordings that are supposedly James Shelby Downard's voice. And he lays out a lot of the theories. A lot of the material doesn't really change from those original recordings. It's all sort of that same packaged material, just retold over and over again. But there's a question as to whether or not that was actually Downard. There's a question of whether or not Downard wrote any of this stuff, that it was all Michael Hoffman, that it was all William Grimstead, and that they were using Downard. This is the argument that we make, that they were possibly using Downard as a vehicle of propaganda for right-wing esotericism, in a weird way, and so
good way of saying it. Yeah,
you know what I mean. It's right-wing esotericism, and it turns out that he has all these connections to Kentucky. William Grimstead wrote The Rebirth of Pan under the pen name Jim Brandon, and obviously pops up in the Hellier story because in the second season, because they relied heavily on the Rebirth of Pan research. And it was just odd to find these connections between the Rebirth of Pan, William Grimstead, the Rebirth of Pan, and Dan Dutton. There are a lot of weird things that we haven't talked about a whole lot publicly, but there's a strange, I think we may have even talked about this on your show, but we don't talk about it in Pennyroyal, that in the Carnivals of Life and Death, James Shelby Downard's purported autobiography that was edited by Elena Freeland, another occult researcher, and Rosicrucian, who was affiliated with Michael Hoffman early on. They later had a falling out. But in the Carnivals of Life and Death, he even mentions Rookwood pottery in Cincinnati, right? And that his father, who was a Mason, Downard Sr., who actually was the founder of the Lima, Ohio Philosophical Society, and he lectured on occult topics, so, and he was a Freemason and his father was a Freemason. So, here's baby Downard with a father and a grandfather that are Masons. They're, how involved were they? I don't know. But in the story, he's at Rookwood and they're making these funerary vases for rituals. And they talk about the artist in residence at Rookwood. And there's only ever been one artist in residence at Rookwood, and that was Dan Dutton, right? And so, it's a really strange thing, because we know that Carnivals of Life and Death wasn't actually written it's written about the period of 1913 to 1935, but he mixes in Brunel University from 1966. I think he makes reference to Elvis. Frequently he says, oh, my memory's kind of shot. I'm mixing in all these things together. So you're looking at a book that was written in, Carnivals, was published in 2006, but was probably written, in that prior period. So for a 10-year period, 15-year period, from like 1985 to 2000, right? Dan was the only artist in resident. And I just, a lot of the stuff that's in his autobiography is actually a contemporary writing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious, did they see Dan's work regarding the fawn? Did Grimstead or Freeland, when they were looking into Downard's connections to Cincinnati, they obviously looked at Rookwood. They would have had to have researched a little bit of Rookwood. And so they would have come across Dan's occult operas. And so is that reference in carnival's actually a direct reference to Dan Dutton. You know, it's one of those weird things. It's just strange. It's just another one of these fucking weird things where it's like, what's that? You know, and so all of the Downard stuff has sort of unfolded that way. You know, he went to college 30 minutes north of Somerset. He attended college with a lot of the patriarchs of the town that, you know, when I first moved down here, everybody's telling me that there's a cult and all of these powerful people were involved in this cult. The people that they were talking about went to fucking college with Downard at Center, you know? And so there's just all of these weird connections that add another layer to the narrative. And really, do they mean anything other than it's super strange? You know, it's just the context of it. That's what's so undeniable about it is the, it's like you can't escape it. You know, it just keeps coming back. And I think that's why so much of, I think the research we're doing and what we talk about a lot involves this idea of recurrences of feedback loops and things like that, you know, especially in terms of narratives, you know, so I don't know. It's crazy. All this stuff's crazy.
And in exploring this idea of an secret occult history to the U.S. transportation system, it's worth noting that Downard's father was a very influential asphalt man who paved much of the Midwest and came up with methods of asphalt creation that, you know, really helped facilitate the paving of, I guess, the rest of America and building the roads. And in Downard's narrative, Downard himself is cast as a Cowan, which is like a rough mason. And you can't think of really a more rough form of masonry than concrete and asphalt.
And that's an undisputed historical figure. Like, he absolutely existed and was in this situation where he was building the roads of America. Whatever you say about James Shelby Downard Jr., like, there was the human being named that, and then there's this mystical character. But James Shelby Downard Sr. is like a documented living human being that made actual contributions that are like verifiable, you know?
It's just the asphalt connection to me is so poetic. You know what I mean? Like once it all just fell together, you know, when you think about that. And later episodes, you know, when we talk about roads into space, right? You know, highways into the sky, you know, that Parsons, you know, Jack Parsons, in order for us to go to space, they were not able to solve the liquid fuel problem. Right. And what's his name? The German scientist,
Von Braun.
Yeah, Werner von Braun of the V2 rockets and all that shit. You know, he was at Redstone Arsenal I think that's in Atlanta, or it's in Georgia, and and so Redstone Arsenal is where where they were trying to solve that problem. So Jack Parsons travels there, and he's the one that figures out that if they mix road asphalt into the liquid fuel mixture, it will allow them to get the thrust they need to actually break through the atmosphere and go into space. So it's like literally the roads and road asphalt helped us to build the roads into space.
Cosmic alchemy.
Cosmic alchemy. Well, and think about that too, like, asphalt itself is sort of, when you create asphalt, there's a certain alchemy to it, right? And you know, like, so much stuff we had to cut out so many things in order to keep these episodes from being, you know, 4 hours long. And so one of the things that I had a huge section about John McAdams, who created the modern roads, you know, and I touch upon it, but I had a huge section because it is really strange how we didn't have any roads from the Roman times. You know, once the Roman Empire fell, people just like deconstructed the roads and built houses out of the stones and shit. They built fences and stuff. So it was like, there was no proper or efficient flow of information from the fall of the Roman Empire until this fucking dude named John McAdams figured out how to make a road. and they call it McAdamizing. And that guy, by doing that, changed Western history. I mean, we're sitting here talking on the fucking internet right now because McAdams figured out how to make roads work again and allowed information to start to flow again. And he was a Freemason and was very deep into Freemasonry. And so, was there any magic involved? I don't think so necessarily, but again, it's just another one of those strange little reverberations, those strange little things that connects all of this stuff together. But I mean, all that, to me, that's fascinating. Our editor Boone was like, "You got to cut that out, man." He's like, put it in a bonus episode or something, or put it, like extended audio.
Cut out what?
The whole thing about McAdams,
Oh.
I mentioned it.
Well, he's like a version of, Downard's father back then.
Yeah. So I don't know, man. It's just, it really is fascinating how all this stuff is connected to roads and asphalt, and how intimate Downard is throughout the story. I mean, the episode that's going to come out, we should talk about Downard throughout the whole thing. There's a whole episode at Mount Palomar, that we've talked about, together. But it's just crazy how all of this is connected, and the fact that it became a part of the pennyroyal mystery also,
So let's talk a little bit about like what you guys think about Downard, that not being Downard in the Sirius Rising tapes. What are you guys' thoughts on that? Do you think that this was something that was just, there was a real Downard they got the information from, they got somebody else to act the part?
I think Darian should talk about our research into the cruise stuff, because
in the second episode when that part was still in there, I was like, well, it's not that I think Harry Crews was James Shelby Downard. However, at the time that we were researching this, we had came across the Wikipedia edits and the history of those edits and who was editing those articles. And it did connect to Harry Crews. And I didn't know anything about Harry Crews at the time. And so, looked him up, and there's like some pictures of him in which he kind of looks a little bit like Downard, in a way. And then we found a video of him doing a reading, I think, like he's reading from his work, and it sounds like Downard. It's like that same sort of cadence, that sort of weird, Southern accent that's, not as common as it used to be. And it's like, could that be the guy from and I'm comparing the voice in this case to the voice on the Sirius Rising tapes. Now, there is no way that anyone who has ever heard the Sirius Rising tapes and who has ever read King Kill 33 that could think that guy on those tapes wrote that same thing. That's not true, right? Like it doesn't take you long to realize that guy could not possibly have been the literary mind behind, the works attributed to James Shelby Downard. At the time, that seemed like a more of a chasm, I think, like in the sense of there is definitely someone else writing this stuff, and this guy on these tapes could possibly be, someone impersonating, someone or whatever could, like all of the different possibilities of who he was at the time and how this could have happened, and so I think that was what I was kind of wrestling with. Now, going back to the Belligerent Rabbit Society letter, so much of the basis of King Kill 33 is already present in this letter. Like so much of the sort of spine of the argument is present there, but in a much more incoherent and rambling way that you're reading it and you think this guy is obviously not mentally okay, right? It's just one sort of disconnected paragraph after another, but they're all dealing with the same sort of things, And so then now I think my current thinking is more that the core of his ideas are being translated by people who are more literary than him, and they're taking liberties with a lot of that material in a sense, And I don't know. We're still it's like I change my mind every day about the Downard thing because we find out some new piece of information. Just recently we've been on this rabbit hole of the news groups and Usenet data that kind of connects to a lot of the early conspiracy theories. And a lot of that material is really interesting as it relates to Downard. Some of the people that definitely knew him personally are people that we can't really identify in the record. It's hard to say how somebody. I think the biggest mystery for me is how someone who is supposedly writing these things and compelled to tell their ideas like this has so little historical footprint. It's such a small historical footprint, for someone who is writing and trying to persuade people about all of these sort of conspiracies and racial issues and all kinds of the weird things that he's talking about. Why is he not writing letters to the editor in newspapers all the time? Like even in the case of the Belligerent Rabbit Society, he's writing to this guy. There is a real document, that he did write, but he's referencing things that are happening in his local newspaper in Florida at the time. And it's like, why? Surely he must have been, had more of a historical footprint than he had. That's kind of baffling to me. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole thing is baffling, I think the biggest mystery of all that we came across in the whole thing is his connection to the woman that he was calling the Great Whore and who that woman ended up marrying in California. And that to me is by far the biggest mystery of the whole thing. It's like, how in the world could he have divorced a woman who ended up marrying a guy who was so central to the JFK conspiracy itself? It's amazing that could have actually happened. I think a lot of that sort of hinges on constructing a timetable of what we know about who met him, where they met him, what he was saying at the time, and then trying to reconcile that with the literary corpus that he left. So I don't know. It's fascinating. It's a really, really interesting story.
Yeah, but what led you to some of that questioning about the tapes and the similarities to Cruz's voice was the other parallels in Cruz's life and his pioneering of Gritlit. And there's probably some kind of using Cruz's life and literature as some kind of part of the composite of Downard's biography.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, there's a lot of interesting intersections between them, right? So Cruz was in Florida. I think he was in Gainesville at the time that a lot of the people around Downard were in St. Petersburg, right? And so, it's just, it's not that close, but it's also not that far away, And so that was one of the things we were looking at. Also, Cruz did a really sort of controversial article about David Duke for Playboy, and this was being written around the same time. And if you read the sort of style of it, of a lot of these things that are attributed to Downard, it has this sort of quality of sort of like this dark, almost like gothic sort of quality to it, and it sort of fit with that. It fit with it. I'm not saying that Cruz was necessarily involved in the writing, but whoever was editing the Wikipedia articles around Cruz and the other articles that they were editing, this was just one small thing that they edited once about Cruz. And it had to be someone that knew something about him enough to have made that edit, And so I think that there's definitely some connection there, but I don't know what it is,
I mean, the thing about that too is that it ties into the whole Kerouac mystery of whether or not there are actual recordings of Kerouac and Downard, which is strange, right? And Adam Go Rightly has mentioned the fact that Visigoth, that had a podcast, he interviewed this woman. And I can't think of her name right now, but she was a journalist in Seattle. And so she had done a lot of research on Kerouac and his connection to the extreme right, which is a sort of a strange thing that the estate, I think, has gone out of the way to suppress, because you really don't want, the father of the beatnik generation to have turned out to be a, I'm not saying he was a Nazi, but you don't want him consorting with Nazi. Suddenly he goes from the extreme left, and the hippie movement, and then it's like suddenly he's a Nazi. But I after I found out about this, I reached out and I found her and asked her about this, and she absolutely denied everything I was saying, and basically told me to fuck off. And if I had any questions about Kerouac, to direct that to the guys that run the Kerouac estate, and whatever there's a guy in England and another guy in the US, and they do some type of like historical preservation of all of his works. It's not like a fan club, but it's like these guys are the sort of the living curators of all officially of his stuff. And she just absolutely denied everything, but yet Visigoth has this interview with her where she's talking about, she acted like she didn't know who the hell Downard was. And, he had recorded her talking about Downard and Kerouac. So, there was another author also that wrote a book called Memory Babe, and it's about the allegations against Kerouac and his sort of dark past with the extreme right. And there were lawsuits involved in that, because of those allegations. But I reached out to him too, because he was there at this time interviewing these people, and he also acted like he didn't know what the hell I was talking about. But you have all these people, it's like, what are these people hiding? Is it just simply that they don't want any direct connections between Kerouac and these groups, in St. Pete, in the mid 1970s. Another thing that I think is really strange that came out of the Usenet stuff, right? Because I don't think Cruz is necessarily Downard. The comparison of the two voices is eerie, especially if you think of it being sped up, right?
I was going to ask if you guys have done that.
Why the comparison?
Have you sped up the voice and seen what it does?
I haven't done that. And Go Riley was the one that first said, that he thought maybe it was sped up, and I was like, I don't, maybe, but we haven't done that yet.
As Southerners, where would you guys put that accent? It sounds Kentucky.
Definitely the Appalachian region. That's what but Cruz is from Alabama, so, and from a very poor area of Alabama, very rural area. It's weird. It's weird that he was so obsessed with Kerouac and was in St. Pete at various times looking for Kerouac, to run into him at Halsom's bookstore, and now it's closed, but that was a weird connection. And all the stuff with David Duke, and Grimstead would have been working with David Duke at the time that he was on the campaign trail with him, or following him around for the Playboy article. But here's something that I think is really weird that Darian found in the Usenet groups, is a conversation between Lauren Coleman and another guy, and it's Lauren Coleman as himself, right? And he says to this guy in a conversation that it's funny that all of these people who have received letters from Downard think they're actually from Downard, because they were all written by Hoffman and Grimstead. And he literally says those words. So then it's like the Belligerent Rabbit Society letter, some of these letters that are going out to people. What if it really was Hoffman and Grimstead, and it's like the Discordian shit, right? Yeah. It's been done before. It's not fucking original, and maybe they came up with this literary Downard definitely existed, right? But did they use that crazy guy that they met as this literary figure to write letters, to mess with people, to put their theories out there? Because You've got Grimstead writing anti-Zion. You've got Hoffman. These guys are connected to some very controversial stuff, and because of that, they can't really put out their Fun 40 in research necessarily, because everybody's going to be like, well, I don't want to listen to you. You wrote this other crazy stuff.
Well, I've also wondered about one other thing. One other possibility is that for some reason, this guy who is, viewing the world sort of schizophrenically, let's use the term broadly, is saying things that are so outside the box or so insightful, possibly, that they're picked up on by these guys with more literary minds, and they're trying to weld his ideas into their framework. And is it possible that he was just so unusual in connecting things that just didn't seem easy to connect, or that he's saying these? It's a little bit like the Lincoln and JFK thing, like how many similarities there were between these presidents. And it's like, he's saying a lot of things that are, interesting, and, and the places, the names of places like Truth and Consequences or the Trinity site and all of these things that he's connected in this really weird way. But we're talking about, the geography of Texas and the West. It's huge spaces of, littered with towns with weird names, and so it's like, I wonder sometimes if he was just in the right place at the right time and had the right ear, that these ideas seem like, oh man, I've never thought about that way. I've never really, and so then it's a theory almost by symbiosis, like through the sort of refinement of the ideas of someone who's really just viewing the world in a much different way. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of utility to creating this folk hero of Downard, and there's a lot of people who want to separate the Fortiana of Hoffman and Grimstead from the political program, but I think it's all integrated in that. And, a lot of people don't really understand the, what's called right-wing esotericism of these people, that it's not just some kind of materialist, racist thing. It's a lot deeper than that. And I think they see Fortiana itself as having utility in showing the cracks in the materialist paradigm, and that Downard is revealing that the establishment, aka usually the Jews, of course, run the world through this, secret magical system that they've been using with the Freemasons, and that's how they control the world, and that Downard is helping to reveal that, like it's all this integrated thing. And
but they're not saying that. They're
right.
It's all subtext. Right. Yeah.
And creating Downard as this folk hero that can lead people down these rabbit holes that eventually, they end up in this right-wing esotericism. He's a good folk hero, a good introduction to wind people down into that way of thinking eventually. So he has there'd be a lot of utility in someone like Downard. And it's got appeal to countercultural types, just like Fortiana does. And we know a lot of these long-term programs of the extreme right were to co-opt a lot of left-wing, anti-establishment, subcultural things into their general program, which I think has largely been successful.
I mean, Downard's really sexy. You know what I'm saying? Like, in a weird way, it's like, it's a very romanticized idea, and it's a good sell. It sold, sold me. You know what I mean? And just in terms of like, oh wow, before I even question it, it's like, if this guy existed, wow, man, like this is fascinating, and I'm ready to hop in the Airstream trailer, man, and fucking take me down the highway with you, like let's see what adventures we get into. You know what I'm saying? Like that, I think that was that's what made it so appealing.
Whereas just, based on the limited things we know about the personalities of Grimstead and Hoffman, they're not exactly these like warm, folksy types.
Yeah.
And that's what you need.
Yeah.
Yeah. My own thoughts. Obviously, I'm not an expert on this, but my own. I read Carnival of Life and Death, which is hours I will never get back from
Did
my
you
life.
throw it at the wall?
But no, I just kind of just gave up on it. But my impression of Downard was, I felt like that was something that he had written because it was just so outlandishly insane and so disjointed. Like Nathan said, I didn't even think about what, that he could be bringing things in from the present and for his present into the past and these type of things. And it really reminded me of literature that you would read from someone that, is experiencing some weird demonic hauntings or some kind of alien abduction type of thing or something like that. And that disjointedness of it really keyed me into the fact that like there was some abuse that went on when he was a child and these type of things. And I think that eccentricity really shows through, especially in that book. And I think that they probably did find some old man that, was saying all these kind of crazy things. And they found a coherent narrative from his ramblings. There's probably a lot more to those tapes, obviously. I'm seeing Nathan smile, so.
Yeah. Well, so I think, man, when you listen to those tapes, it's obvious that they're cutting out sections of the tape, right?
Yeah, it's edited.
And like heavily edited, because they like cut him off occasionally. When you read the first mention of the Sirius Rising tapes in Robert Anton Wilson's Cosmic Trigger, he describes the tapes that he was sent as outlining how there was this conspiracy to use the occult to prepare humanity for an alien invasion. Okay, that is not present in the Sirius Rising tapes that I've listened to, right? And right, I mean, do you agree, Sergio? I mean, there's just no mention of that. And then it's called Sirius Rising, and Robert Anton Wilson's Illuminatus trilogy obviously mentions Sirius, the star Sirius, and the number 23 and all that stuff. So, was Grimstead referencing, in Cosmic Trigger, all these guys are talking about receiving transmissions, they're channeling transmissions from Sirius. And so was Downard channeling some of this stuff? There's been the suggestion that there were 9 tapes, not just one tape, and that some of these tapes were recordings possibly of Downard or of other people that were channeling entities. But the fact that Robert Anton Wilson mentions this alien invasion that's not on the tapes that were released makes me think that there is a reference to that. And in the Rebirth of Pan, it opens, the introduction to the Rebirth of Pan talks about a war between 2 alien races. And we had the chance to ask Grimstead a question through some people that were interviewing him, and they let me give them that question to ask him, and he acted like the suggestion that Downard ever said anything connected to aliens was preposterous, and also that he has never said anything, or published anything related to aliens. And it's like, dude, the introduction to the Rebirth of Pan mentions an alien war, but he acted like that was the most insane thing ever, and he would have none of it.
Freemasonic witchcraft rituals, and that's totally okay, but space aliens, no, that's just crazy.
It's crazy, man. Right. So I think there's more to the Sirius Rising tapes. There has to be,
Yeah, it's probably way more disjointed than, they obviously, I mean, they took what they wanted from this crazy old man and they flew with it, But I really think that Carnivals of Life and Death, I think that was written by him, according to other people that say that like Hoffman and that like they write well, and to try to like bring yourself down to the level of that kind of just incoherency and insanity.
It was heavily edited.
Is just
But my understanding from everything is that most of that was him, but heavily edited, but not like fully reconstructed like the other essays.
Parfrey definitely kept all the craziness, all the defeating a bunch of Klansmen with a pop gun and all that great stuff.
Before we move on from Downard, I do want to kind of just say that one of the reasons why we're so obsessed with this is because his ideas and form of synchromysticism is really influential, and you see it everywhere today in this kind of pop culture conspiracy theory about dissecting movies and popular culture, because that's what the elites use to control us, and revelation of the method through those things. It's really hard to not overemphasize the importance of this kind of conspiracy theory. It's not about some like thing that you can, figure out some conspiracy that actually happened with responsible people who can be held accountable. It is this really weird, non-linear kind of divination system that I don't think a lot of people understand that are engaging with it, don't understand what's going on. A lot of outsiders just think it's crazy and don't know that it's really this kind of engineered thing that has an ideological basis. It's not just, you figuring things out. And especially with the entertainment stuff, it's really about the evil Jews who control Hollywood and the music industry are programming us with this content, blah, blah, blah. It really does have these ideological bases to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very important for, like you said, man. I mean, that's exactly spot on what I believe, that people need to understand that there is an ideological basis to this. Yeah, that it's not just some fun occult stuff to get into and to check out,
Yeah, not to say that like the synchromystic method can't yield results, because it absolutely can, but certain aspects of it, are tied to those ideological underpinnings, and it's just important for people to know that if they're going to engage in this kind of thinking, to not like fall into these traps that have been laid on purpose to make converts, pretty much.
Yeah, man. That's the thing. It's ideological traps. That's really what it is. Yeah, it's just like showing people, hey, don't fall in that hole.
Yeah,
you can look at it. Don't fall into it.
But, I think that like this is something that comes up a lot with any of the stories that are sort of fuzzy, like Pennyroyal or Hellier or the Downard stuff. I think that in a lot of ways, whatever he's picking up on, as crazy as it sounds, there is some sort of logic to I'm not saying there's a logic to it, but there's something there that he's grasping toward, right? And the only way to construct it, to sort of back propagate that is to generate a theory of people that would explain it. It's the New World Order, and that's what's happening or whatever, And so like the idea that the fact that there's something there, I think is true. Right.
Yeah.
But I don't think that necessitates a plot necessarily. Right. There could be other ways that reality is functioning to generate these sort of strange synchronicities of names and places and all of the crazy stuff surrounding the JFK conspiracy. It's just, there are so many weird things about that it's almost impossible to believe that all of those things happen, And so it's like there is a mystery, but the explanation is too prosaic and too human, and it necessitates a plot that is too complex to even be possible in reality, you know. And so I think that I think that that's where it was interesting to me, is that someone's picking up on a lot of these same things that we're seeing, you know, or that happen. But I think where it really deviates is from that is the sort of QAnon or Pizzagate stuff. You know, it's like somebody's got to be raping kids for all this shit to be happening, and let's go kill them. You know, it's weirder than that. I think whatever is happening is weirder than that.
Well, and Grimstead or Brandon, you know, he talks about that stuff in Rebirth of Pan. He really does explore this like synchromystic mechanism. I think their big idea is that the Masonic sorcerers take advantage and use the synchromystic mechanism because they understand it. Like there is this web of connections and synchronicities and things like that over reality, but they know how to manipulate it.
I've gone back and forth on like the different models of explanations that there could be. I did a lot of reading of Stan Groff. I don't know if you ever heard of Stan Groff. He was he founded integral psychology at Harvard, and he was partners with Timothy Leary and Ram Dass in the original sort of psychedelic studies. He also guided more LSD sessions than anybody alive. I think it's like 2,700 or something. He was sort of responsible for a lot of the construction of Esalen Institute in California, and sort of he put a book out that describes his sort of perspective on what this mystery could be, and he goes back to an idea that's sort of heavy in the occult world, is that there's sort of a kaleidoscopic thing that is like moving in astrological time and is projecting this sort of battle of archetypes, this interplay of archetypes that is fixed, and it's sort of being manifested imperfectly by human beings that are more or less in tune with it, and that interplay is real. That is a real interplay of these archetypes in sort of astrological time.
The eternal pagan psychodrama.
Right. Yeah. But it's not, it's sort of like, you know, Twin Peaksy in the sense that it's the guy that owns the sawmill is just the guy that owns the sawmill. He's not part of like an overall conspiracy. The murder just is more or less perfect or imperfect based on the conditions of his rage and all of the sort of things that are, you know, percolating through to make things happen. Yeah. And so I think that model is better in the sense that it's not being hijacked or anything. It's just sort of an inexorable movement of archetypal interplay that we're all subject to at some level, you know. I'm not saying we're, you know, at the whim of it, but the idea that people are like, you know, conspiring to sort of majorly shift the collective unconscious, I don't think that's happening, you know.
I have a question about for you, Sergio, that I came across. It is, so there are various versions of King Kill 33, right? Like published at various times, and some of them are more complete than other ones. But I found a version that I'd never come across that's published by Michael Hoffman in Paranoia magazine in 2000, right? So there's the one that he published in 1998, right? There's the one in 88, which was in Apocalypse Culture, right? And it's a smaller one. But then in 98, he supposedly published the complete version. But then I didn't know that Paranoia magazine had published this, also a King Kill 33 with his name and Downard on it in 2000. And it was strange too. I found it because I was researching the psychedelic rite and trying to find evidence of a psychedelic rite. And then this, you know, I own all of the Paranoia magazines, and so I was searching them digitally, and then this edition popped up, and it just so happened to have King Kill 33. in the King Kill 33 in Apocalypse Culture, and the one that was published by Hoffman in 1998. I haven't had time to look since we've been working on getting the show out, but I just came across it. And I thought, man, I got to go back and check this. Does he mention? I know he mentions fairy, right? David Ferry, because he talks about fairies and how David Ferry's connected to that. Does he talk about Clay Shaw and Jim Garrison in that version of King Kill 33?
I don't know, but I've encountered Hoffman mentioning Garrison a few times. So, I mean, but anyone who's into the conspiracy theory is going to be mentioning him. So I don't know.
So it looks like an official King Kill 33 written by Downard, and it has a whole section on how Jim Garrison was mystically putting this stuff together, which made me think about the propinquity thing.
Send that to me. I don't know if I have that.
See, and that's where I was like, we were talking about that. You know, what connections are there between Downard and this whole Garrison thing in New Orleans, right? And so it literally is the end of King Kill 33, and they're talking about Garrison, Shaw, and Ferry, and this whole like mystical thing. But he doesn't say propinquity. But then I'm thinking, you know, is this Hoffman? Is this Downard? Did they know about this back in the 70s? You know, is this sort of an admission?
Is that where that came from?
Yeah, like you've suggested before.
I don't know. And
yeah, I mean, when I read it, I was like, I don't remember reading this in the other version. And but then since we were going to talk tonight, I was like, I've got to ask him and see if he remembers, because I thought maybe I'm just misremembering. You know,
let's talk about this propinquity thing. We've discussed this some. I think we did it on a Patreon episode at one point. But let's talk a little bit about that. Just like, you know, that there's some, at least in the realm of ideas, there's a connection between something that Jim Garrison came up with and this whole synchromystical Downardian stuff.
Yeah. So he has a couple of these memos, Time and Propinquity, in which Garrison was using just like maps and names and basically divining correlations and starting with those and then like working his way backwards to find connections. And yeah, I think it did bear some fruit for him, but everyone thought he was fucking crazy. It does look like a prototype of synchromysticism, and especially of mystical toponymy, because he was really known to use maps, and he said, you know, give me a map and I can solve any mystery. So that it really sounds like the kind of Downardian method, or at least some of it.
Yeah, drawing lines on a map.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're totally like, I think you're right. I'd never heard of that before until you mentioned it to me, and then dug into it a little bit, and I was like, oh man, you know, like this has to be connected somehow to this.
But maybe he's just crazy in the same way. I mean,
yeah, it's totally. It's so fascinating. The whole Downard thing is just, you know, synchromysticism. You know, I mean, I love synchromysticism. You know, I really do. You know, in terms of 40 and research, you know, that's my jam. You know, I really, really dig it. You know, it's just, it sucks that there's this ideological basis behind it, you know, but that doesn't change, like you said earlier, you know, it doesn't change the fact that it is a solid methodology for investigating some of this stuff.
Yeah. And I really like how you relate it to psychic questing in the latest episode.
I really do think that, again, you know, a lot of this for me is learning stuff. I hadn't really talked to, you know, I knew about the Greenstone and the Seven Swords, right? I love those stories, but I hadn't really thought about psychic questing or talked to anyone who had done any type of psychic questing. And, you know, Charles Topham, you know, who's the final guest on the third episode, you know, he had two of the Meania swords for a while, and then he sold them. God, man, that was like a 5-hour interview. Like, we talked.
Yeah. What are these swords? What are these?
So Andrew Collins and I forget the other guy's name off the top of my head, but Andrew Collins and some other guys in the mid 1970s and into the 80s, they really did find, they were doing this psychic questing stuff where it was like, all right, everybody sit in a circle, and they were using Ouija boards, a lot of what I would term spiritualism practices, right? And they were trying to connect with the spirit of place. They would go to a place in England with a storied past, and then try to receive psychic impressions, and then follow those psychic impressions that would lead them on this adventure. And so they did this, and actually did find a sword in like a 800-year-old bridge, and it made like the newspapers in England were abuzz with this, and they became kind of minor celebrities, and then continued to psychic quest and found 6 more swords. So there were like 7 swords. There was some evil being they were finding. It's a crazy story, and a lot of it only exists because of the interaction between these people and the story. That's my opinion of it. I think they probably believe they really were fighting some ancient demon, from Egypt, that some mystical order had used this Mionea sword to stop from destroying humanity, right? They probably believe that. But I think that these people, through their own they were it was like make believe. You know what I'm saying? Like a form of make believe where the story you're telling, your interaction with these things is changing the story. I mean, some of it was. I'm not saying it did. I mean, it definitely happened. All kinds of people started psychic questing and started trying to receive messages and trying to go on all these adventures. And they did, and they found things. It's kind of like randonautica, right? Mm-hmm. Whenever these people are like, I went to this place and I found this thing. And like for them, they're drawing a personal connection to that place through something that they think is symbolic there, right?
Yeah, something that's meaningful to them, yeah.
Right. And then that creates this meaningful coincidence. And so, psychic questing was like an early form of randonautica. It really was, and it used this sort of randomness, to divine the next step in the mystery. And when you look at that and look at how things have unfolded for us, I'm not saying we're psychic questing, but there's a heavy element of us in the story, right? That it would have only unfolded the way that it has because of our interaction with it. Right. Even the stuff with Gaterma, and finding Spiro Agnew, all of those things, talking to Pamela, and she was the one that mentioned the mine, and then the mine led to Gaterma. Watching that play out, it couldn't have played out that way except through us, specifically us, and specifically the things that we were bringing to the table, and the narrative elements that were mixed together through us, that brought us to this moment, and so in that way, I do think there's an element of psychic questing. I think for us in this sort of, I think of that as analog, and a lot of what's happening with us involves a digital element. It really does, because of the way we perform our research, because of the data mining, because of just all of this, and it involves technology, and it can't exist and can't be told without technology,
I'm curious to get Kyle's and Darian's kind of thoughts on some of the things that you guys have been talking about, and what you guys have experienced and making the second season. And I think because we're only, at the moment, 3 episodes in, we probably need to do another episode. How many episodes are there going to be, Nathan? 11?
11.
Yeah,
okay.
11 episodes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Is there some significance to that?
About when in 2 months. But what's some of you guys' thoughts about working on this project? And
well, for me personally, like the investigation at Pennyroyal is different than anything I've ever done in the paranormal world. I originally started in like 2004 ghost hunting. And like I had a lot of preconceptions at that point that like a ghost is the only thing I'm looking for, and it's the spirit of someone that was alive and isn't anymore, and all these kind of things that like I just took for granted were the truth or whatever. And you know, years, like I've been doing this, that was like 2004, so I've been doing this for 18ish years, and like I'm not at all in that same place at all. Like 5 or 6 years ago, I stopped being into that idea of like I always wanted to meld ideas, but it really wasn't even till Hellier till I gave myself like the latitude to be able to accept that things were all interconnected, and like you know, just because you're looking for A doesn't mean that when B shows up it's not the same thing, you know. And so I had just been getting around to these like more universal reality ideas when we started Pennyroyal. And Pennyroyal is different than anything we've ever done, because like it absolutely has all these concrete like signposts for what we're looking for. And as we've talked about, like we think we don't have like this grand idea of what the end puzzle's going to be, but we're just picking it up piece by piece, you know? And so it's interesting to have all these real world like ties to what we're finding in like, you know, compare that to ghost hunting, where the ghosts or the stories are like, oh, I saw this thing here, and that might line up with some historical fact. It's like, okay, that's great. But like what we're finding here is like a healthy dose of the personal experiences, where there are these like signposts to Darren and Nathan and I of which way kind of to go. But then it leads us to these absolute concrete evidence things, like such as Charles Hayes, who's going to be one of the main guys of the next episode. And it's just these crazy interconnection things that like I said, personally, I've never been used to with how I've investigated before. But it just absolutely brings these things up to the forefront that like are absolutely the truth, you know, in even a subjective way, you can realize these things as universal, you know, and it's just kind of amazing to be able to experience that, especially with Darren and Nathan, like their data mining side and experience, like really opens me up to just a whole new way of being able to experience these like data collections, you know, these things that are absolutely vital to the bigger picture that we're finding, you know?
Darian, some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that with season 2, a lot of season 2 is concerning events that happened right before the release of season 1. And so I think a lot of that is interesting because I know what we knew at that time, like who we had talked to, what we had talked about, you know. And so some of the craziest things that happened, like the stuff with the documents that we talk about a little bit in this season, and the signs that were being put around town, all of those things were so just otherworldly strange that, you know, they happened because you lived through them. And then, you know, trying to reconcile that with sort of the theory and the archaeology of how these ideas came to be. I think that's what's really, really interesting. And how it connects personally in so many ways that don't ever make it into an episode. You know, it's like, I think that's something that can, you know, a lot of people might sort of overlook, is how real the mystery of some of this stuff is, and the sort of spooky things that happen every day around strange coincidences, you know. I think that's kind of the part that keeps us going, you know, the part that, you know, when we think we don't have any real research left to find, we'll find something just otherworldly in a sense. It's in a total new direction that we didn't think we would ever go in, you know. Even in things that we've looked at in every way that I think we could have looked at them, you know, someone will come up to us with some new piece of information that really changes the whole story around, So I think a lot of it for me has been that personal connection to it and what that must say about the world that we live in, and what it must say about what we're assuming is true and what we're assuming, can't be possible. It's all kind of thrown in the air. I don't know. For me, it's been a process of increasing agnosticism, I think, and I think that's kind of interesting in the way that some of these sort of initiatory things work.
Kyle, I like what you said about the ghost hunting stuff, because I definitely went down my own path with that too, and it's like that was like the gateway drug to the rest of all this madness.
Yeah, and you think of it in this like almost straight-laced way, and then something eventually kicks where you're like, oh shit, I was like investigating a corner of a room that is the paranormal like realm,
Right. Nathan, what do we have to expect for episodes 4 through 11?
This next episode that's going to drop for our Patreons, obviously this will air afterwards, but it's coming out tomorrow. And then Friday, there's the 4th episode. We really dig into the Chuck Hayes mystery, another Mr. X that appears here in Pulaski County. And just like Darian said, where we're like, that's it. There's nobody else weird here that we could possibly find. And then somebody is like, hey, have you looked at this guy? Someone that's not from Pulaski County contacts us and tells us, hey, look at this guy. And then it's like, it just explodes into something even weirder. And with each one of these episodes, it's laying the groundwork for what's coming next, and you need to understand these things that we were experiencing. And that's the way we've tried to tell the story this season. A lot of it seems to involve things that are outside of Pulaski County, because it does. I mean, it really does. And those concepts, tulpas, egregores, the psychic questing stuff, all of those things, I think, help lay the groundwork to understanding this. But, we're going to get into, there's a lot more involving Willis Carto and right-wing esotericism, later, toward the end of it. But, we're going to talk about, there's an episode about roads into space. There's a episode about roads beneath America, with the underground. And in a big theme of this season and the first season too, but definitely in this season, is what enchantment is to people, what re-enchantment is, and some of these ideas that have been put forth by David Southwell in his Hookland series. This idea that enchantment is resistance. He is fighting right-wing esotericism and fascism in England in his local community, because fascists are attempting to steal the local folklore and convince people that they have a shared folklore, but they're manipulating the folklore,
sounds familiar. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I really, for me, there's a heavy element of that to this story. And so I hope, that with the first season, we tried to leave people with sort of a, not an inspiring message necessarily, but just hey man, it's okay to believe in magic, like the world is a strange, like these things we're telling you are evidence that the world you live in is a very magical place, which means you can control your own narrative. And this second season is really trying to hit that idea home, even more strongly, that, you can tap into this magic that exists where you are. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to be a magician. You can be you, and you can control your narrative and use magic in your narrative and combat this fucking weird encroachment of fascism and fascist ideology that seems to be infecting every society right now, especially this one, so.
That's very well put, Nathan.
Thank you.
Where can people find Pennyroyal seasons 1 and 2?
You could go to our website, pennyroyalpodcast.com, but we're on all the major platforms, Apple, Spotify, at least for now. But anywhere anyone wants to listen, you'll find us. And we've got a Patreon, the Liminal Lodge. If anybody wants to, it's where we talk about all of our research. The people that belong to the Patreon, to the Lodge, a lot of the stuff in the second season, they've heard it all for the last 12 months. As we found this research, as it came out, they were right there with us. Now it wasn't put together in the way that it is right now to create this narrative, but if anybody's interested in kind of joining us in trying to solve some of this stuff, definitely you can join the Liminal Lodge and get the episodes early and get some research. I'm going to share that belligerent rabbit society letter with you, but also with the lodge members are get to see this stuff. So you can find us anywhere.
Very cool. And Kyle and Darian, where can people find you? Kyle, absolutely, please plug the museum.
Yeah, you can always find me or my employee at the museum, the International Paranormal Museum. We have a website. I think it's internationalparanormalmuseum.com. You can buy some goodies off that, or just come see us in person. We're open Tuesdays through Saturdays here in downtown Somerset. So definitely check that out. Or you can find us on Facebook and all the social medias and everything.
All right. And Darian?
Yeah, I don't really do a lot of stuff like that. Most of my work is in programming, so I don't really need clients necessarily right now or anything. So you can look me up. I do write some stuff on Medium, so you can find some articles that I've written on Medium. I dug quite a bit into some of the tangential stories around some of this stuff. One of them I wrote recently about Christian Priber, which has a kind of an interesting history in Tennessee. I think it's kind of interesting. So you can find me on there under Darian West. Other than that, download Pennyroyal and listen to it and visit the museum.
And also to plug Darren, we're working on this kind of revolutionary, paranormal investigation device that we've been talking about for about a year. And he's the main source or main driving force behind it. So hopefully this year we'll have a working prototype that people can try out and stuff. But it's going to be an awesome thing that Darren's spearheading.
Yeah, I'm supposed to have some demo of it by the end of this month. So for some
February 4th, we got it.
Yeah. So a lot of the work that we did on Pennyroyal in terms of channeling and thinking through that, and some other stuff that we've worked on has sort of percolated into this device. And I do hope that if we can pull off everything that we're hoping to do, it would definitely be a big shift in how we think of paranormal equipment and things like that. And I don't come from that angle of things at all, but very little is done on the software side in the paranormal space. So this will be interesting to approach it from sort of a data sense, so yeah, look out for that when it happens.
All right. Excellent. Thank you, gentlemen. This has been very great. We, of course, you guys, you can find us, Conspirinormal.com. And we've got a few things going on ourselves. We've got the first Strange Realities Presents extra extended hangout coming up with Kiki Dombrowski on February 25th. So you guys check that out. You can go and become a Patreon for $10 and get in to see that, which is going to be more extended kind of introduction to tarot, and then she's going to dig a little deeper into a lot of things. And Kiki is also featured in Pennyroyal season 2, so you can check her out there as well. But she's going to be doing some like a little workshop as well with us too. That's going to be an interesting night. So that's going to be February 25th, and we'll have more details as we get a little closer. But our Patreon is also available, so y'all can tell you where to find that.
You can find that at patreon.com/Conspirinormal. Also, I hope you guys enjoyed our Paranoid Styles premiere episode, which would have been last week, I think. And we're going to be doing that every month as well. And we might tie in some Patreon content to that. So stay tuned and check us out at patreon.com/Conspirinormal.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. And we will be back next week on Conspirinormal.
If you would like to help the show, please consider becoming a Patreon at www.patreon.com/Conspirinormal or leave a one-time donation at Conspirinormal.com. And please check out our YouTube channel, Conspirinormal Podcast.